Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnayos Eruvin, Parak Beis, Chapter 2. We're going to do two Mishnayos today, Mishnah Beis and Gimel 2 and 3. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning memory of my mother, Mr. Shalom, Mr. Binowitz, Shalom Espas, Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. Okay, so yesterday we were introduced to the Pasi Birois, about when there's this well, the Rishus Harab in the public domain, the way you can turn that area around the well into a private domain, into Rishus HaYachid, by putting these double these boards, these double corner boards, these double boards on the four corners. And then depending on the gap in between them, you'd have to add plain boards and not have to add plain boards. So now Mishnah Beis reads, Mutter lahakriv labe'er. You can get as close as you want to the well, meaning you can make this area close to you. Does it have to only be spread out? Can it be close by? How close can you get to the well to do this? So mutter lahakriv labe'er, you can get close to the well itself when you set up this whole pole system. As long as there is enough room for the cow, its head and the majority of its body, to be inside this enclosed area and drink. So it has to be large enough that basically the majority of the animal's body, its head and the majority of its body, is enclosed in this area. If it's large enough for that, the size is good enough. If it's smaller than that, then the Chachamim said that's not good enough. And the reason is because we are concerned that if the majority of the animal is not inside the area of the well, that you may land up taking the water out from the enclosed area, outside of the pole area, into the Rishus Harabim. That's what we're afraid. I'm not sure exactly, to be honest, why we're so afraid of it, if its mouth is right there. But apparently we're concerned that if the majority, if at least half the animal is out, then somehow or another you're going to forget yourself and take the water that you draw out from the hole beyond the enclosed area, because so much of the animal is outside of that. But that's the halacha. The halacha is it's got to be this size. And how does that translate into a distance? The answer is 2 amas long. An animal, a typical cow, is going to be the head and most of the body of a cow is 2 amas long. That's the typical size. Now they bring down here on the bottom that this 2 amas, which was measured by a cow, would apply to a goat that's smaller or to a camel that's bigger. This was the standard size that they said. The cow is an animal of average size, and therefore that is the size that they worked with saying, how close can you get to the actual well? But even if we're talking about a camel, that 2 amas is still, the animal is going to be outside, is going to be out of the area. Nonetheless, as long as 2 amas of him are going to be inside, following the size of a cow, your pasi birois, your enclosed area around the well, is going to be fine. Mutter laharchi kol shehu. You're allowed to distance yourself any amount that you want. As long as you increase the number of boards. Meaning, the first half of the Mishnah was how close can you get? The next part of the Mishnah is how far can you get? The answer is go as far as you want, as long as you put enough boards in between the gaps of the corners to make sure that it's not too open. So that's how the Mishnah Beis ends. Mishnah Gimel is a continuation. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad Beis Sasayim. Rabbi Yehuda says the area, how far can it be from the well? There is a point where it gets too big, and that is called a Beis Sasayim, the area of 2 sa'ah. Okay, so let me just read to you here from the bottom to understand. A Beis sa'ah, which means the area of a sa'ah. A sa'ah is a dry measure; it's a volume. So a Beis sa'ah is an area in which 1 sa'ah of grain seeds is planted. If you were to plant a sa'ah, which is a measure of seeds, how much area would you use for that? That's the Beis sa'ah. It measures 50 by 50 amas, 50 by 50 cubits. Thus, and now we say here, what is the maximum size of this area? Is 2 Beis sa'ah. So 2 Beis sa'ah are 50 by 100 amas, are 5,000 square amas. That's the max of how wide you can make this area. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Amrulai. So they said to him, meaning the other sages said to him, Amr Beis Hasayim. The sages only said this limit of an area of 2 sa'ah. They only said that regarding a garden or a karpef, which we'll explain what that means in a second. But if let's say it was a pen or a sachar, which again we'll explain soon, or it is a backyard or a courtyard, then afilu beis chameshes kurin, even if you decided, even if it's an area that you plant for planting 5 kur, afilu beis asara kurin mutter. And even if it's going to be an area of 10 kur, it'd be mutter. Okay, so what's going on is like this. From the wording of the sages back to Rabbi Yehuda, where it says they only said Beis Hasayim by these areas, that means there was a tradition from the earlier sages that there will be this area called a Beis Hasayim, an area of 2 sa'ah, that you will not be able to carry in. Even if you go ahead and make your Erev, even if you go ahead and you make your Erev that you need, it's not going to help if it's going to be Beis Hasayim. Rabbi Yehuda says that applies even here by this case with the well. The Chachamim said, no, it doesn't apply by the case by the well. It applies only by a gina, a garden, or a karpef. Now, what is a karpef? A karpef is a large fenced area outside a town used for such purposes as storing wood, which means that this area, again, it may be fenced in, but it's not an area of residence. People don't use it for residence or for residential activities. A gina is a garden. It's the same idea. It's not like people live in the garden or do whatever activities are, whatever is considered regular living activities. You don't do that in a garden. So therefore, that is where we say this idea that even if it's enclosed, okay, and even if it's enclosed, which according to Torah law should be Rishus HaYachid, because midaraisa, you can go ahead and carry in any area as long as it's enclosed. But the Chachamim were concerned that if you have an area, a large area, that is, even if it's enclosed, but it's not used for your typical residential activity, people would get confused with that in a public domain. And therefore they said that when you have this area, this non-residential area, that's larger than 2 beis sa'ah, they gave it the status of what we call a karmelis, an area that you may not carry according to rabbinic law. But once you go, so there we said, okay, so what do you want to do? You want to surround it with a wall. And it's Rishus HaYachid. But the Rabbanan said, even if it has a wall, but it's such a large non-residential area, you can't carry in there. That is where they said that an area beis sa'ah, you can't carry in even though it's walled. But that's because no one either lives there or does regular living activities. But if let's say we're talking about a deer. Now a deer, they translate as a pen. But a deer means like this. It's a pen, it's a fence, but it's a movable fence in the sense that they would take the animals out into a field, let them, go to the bathroom all over the field, right? Have all the manure there to fertilize the field. And then when that field was done, they took apart the pen, brought the animals over to another area, put the pen up, and went ahead and let the animals do their thing there. Now, in that situation, we say that that area is considered where there is going to be this living, they're going to be doing this, it's called an area of regular living activity. My understanding in this case would be because there's always a person there. You don't just leave the animals there by themselves. There's always going to be a person there. So there's a person regularly there. That's called like a residential area. A sachar. Sachar is a pen, but it's not out in the field. It's within the. A sachar is is an enclosure for animals that's inside a town. I don't know if inside the town it's the same purposes, but it's a closure inside the town. And they say here on the bottom, these 2 areas are considered places where people live because shepherds stay there constantly to tend to the animals. So there's always somebody there. And that's called residential enough to say that there, you don't need a beis hasayim. You can be as big as you want. Or a muktzah or a chotzer. Here, muktzah means a backyard or an area about the yard behind the houses. So they explain here, the yard behind the houses were used to store everyday items, while the yards in the front of the houses were used for many daily activities. So you had a courtyard in the front of the houses. There was a lot going on there. That definitely was used for regular living activities. Even behind the houses where they stored everyday items, again, you were going back and forth to get those items from there. So those are also considered areas for living activities. And this is where we say, as the Mishnah says, it does, doesn't matter how big it is. It could even be an area that would be enough to plant 5 kur. 5 kur lands up being, as they bring down here, 5 kur is 150 beis sa'ah. 10 base kur is 300 beis sa'ah. The point is, at this point, it can be, if you're talking about a residential area or where regular living activities are done, we don't care how big it is. If it's enclosed, it's enclosed. And that is what's going to help you for the case of the well also. There is no limit by the well. It can be as big as you want. Because the well area where people are bringing their animals and drinking, that's called a regular living activity. Then the Mishnah concludes, Umutar laharchik kol shahu, and therefore you can go as far as you want. Any of these areas are not like the unresidential areas to be concerned that people will think it's like they get confused with a shusarabim. However, but the bigger it is, the more you're going to have to put up the regular boards in between the gaps to make sure the gaps aren't going to be too large. Now, what comes out at the end, though, that Rabbi Yehuda in the beginning of the Mishnah disagree with all this. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, even an area that's going to be a regular usable area, it's limited to being a beis sa'ah. You can't do more than a beis sa'ah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, however, one may not carry even in a completely residential area, such as a courtyard, that is larger than 2 beis sa'ah unless it is surrounded by regular closed partitions. The area around the well is surrounded not by regular partitions, but by isolated double posts and boards, which form partitions that are more open than closed. The point here is that Rabbi Yehuda says, even in a residential area, if it's going to be more than beis sa'ah, you have to put up, according to, well, this is how they bring it down here. You're going to have to use, you want to close up a beis sa'ah, you want to close it up, then you have to put up regular walls. You cannot start working with walls that actually have open areas. But we say, halachically, it's like it's closed. That you can't do. The point here by the well was that we had this special setup about these boards. As we mentioned yesterday, the gap in between, even the gaps that we allow, are larger than the typical gaps. Okay, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda, 13 and a third. They're larger than your typical gaps. Not only are they larger than your typical gaps, there's more open space than closed space, and that's usually a problem when you have spaces in your wall. But here by Pasabi Rois, because of the fact that we say it's 10 tvachim high, each board is an amma in direction, and it's at 2 ends, according to Torah law, that's enough to be considered enclosed. But again, that's not a real wall, so to speak. That's not a strong wall. That's a halachic wall. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you're going to use that Pasabi Rois, you're going to use that halachic wall, then there's a limit. It can't be more than a beis hasayim. Even if you're talking about a situation of a residential area, like a courtyard, the well is a residential area. Even if you're talking about a courtyard, if you don't have regular walls and you close it up to go ahead and if you don't have regular walls, to go ahead and close up your courtyard with these kinds of walls isn't going to work. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.